Hey YouTube, what's up? Dr. T here, and welcome to my hometown, St. Petersburg, Florida. We are located on the central west coast of Florida by Tampa Bay and in the Gulf of Mexico on the west side of the county. Take a minute to have a look at St. Petersburg in all its wonders, a piece of paradise to live in. If you are new to my channel, take a look around. You will find everything for one-stop shopping in the playlists. So here we are on blockchain again. I'm looking at the cryptocurrency news as of recently. Plasma Cash has Vitalik Buterin, is that how you pronounce it, solve all of the cryptocurrency problems. So I looked him up on YouTube and he gave an interview about his ideas or whatever. So I'm going to take a look at that. Come along and see what he has to say.
Blockchain and distributed ledger technologies enable people to interact in a peer-to-peer way without going through a trusted intermediary. This innovation makes it possible for us as a society to organize collective governance in exciting new ways. But it also poses challenges to our existing governance frameworks. I had a chance to sit down today with Vitalik Buterin, the inventor of Ethereum, to delve into this topic. When you first started Ethereum, what was the philosophy with which you started it? So you set out to build something, you wanted to do something that was Turing complete because you wanted to be able to build this sort of world computer, general purpose blockchain, instead of something that was limited to just a certain set of transactions like Bitcoin. Did you start out with this grand vision?
No, and it started as something much simpler, which was I was working on a project called Mastercoin, which was basically a blockchain protocol that was trying to support maybe 15 different types of financial protocols. And I realized, oh wait, if we replace these 5 features with a programming language, then it goes up from 15 types of financial transactions to 40 types of financial transactions, and the protocol becomes simpler at the same time. Then I realized, oh wait, this isn't just about financial transactions, you can also do all this other stuff. Then I realized, oh wait, you can do even more stuff, and it just sort of grew into the Web3 vision over the course of maybe half a year to a year. Yes.
So for people who don't know what Web3 is.
Web3 is this vision that Ethereum plus a combination of several other technologies can bring about a more kind of decentralized internet that puts basically more control in the hands of the user. And this is a suite of technologies that includes Ethereum as a kind of decentralized database, Whisper as kind of decentralized messaging, Swarm as decentralized content hosting, possibly other technologies as well. And these things will be developed in some ways together, but designed to be nicely complementary with each other. And you could see a lot of applications using some combination of both.
What about the infrastructure environment, hardware requirements and things?
Well, one of the things I actually love about blockchains is that they can survive without needing much special hardware. So like I personally just actually really love the idea that basically the thing could just run on a few thousand guys with their regular laptops. That's one of the things that really excited me about Bitcoin early on. It doesn't require all of this like $1 billion of capital started up by people who are already here before, and that would be basically impossible for a new group to match. It's just, like a few thousand people on their laptops is all that you need.
With respect to hardware, what about people who are not going to have laptops, but just smart devices?
Look, one of the things that we kind of deeply cared about from the start, especially for people with laptops, is a very strong light client technology. So this basically means that you can use this technology to have a client that runs on a phone, which has almost the same levels of security and trustworthiness as a regular client, except it's vastly more efficient.
And you can do that in Sudan. Where you have people with pretty
probably
basic phones
not Sudan now, but probably Sudan in 3 to 5 years. Yes, like people do underestimate, I think, just like the sheer level of mobile penetration and like how quickly it's growing. I think once all of these places have internet access, and once they get up to basically once the quality of $20 phones increases by another couple of years worth of time, it'll definitely be at that point.
So you genuinely think that Ethereum is going to be a worldwide penetrating technology, and that we're not going to be limited by bandwidth and hardware?
That's definitely what we hope. I mean, like if blockchains were only usable by the rich, then the whole space would definitely be much less interesting.
So how are you thinking about the incentive structures that you're building in, particularly with the upcoming transition to Casper,
Sure.
proof of stake. There's a lot of skepticism, as I'm sure
Yes.
you know, that there's just going to be this massive centralization around people who already have huge stakes
Yes.
being able to control the network. Obviously, this is not something that surprises you and that you're planning for.
I mean, it's definitely kind of another sort of devil you know argument, because like with proof of work, you notice that 70% of mining is done out of China, 70% of mining is done using mining hardware created by one company and run by basically like 5 or 10 guys. And like the thing with hardware centralization is that it's the sort of thing that is in some ways much harder to dislodge, right? So like in Casper, for example, there's a mechanic where if even if like a group of people that have like more than a third of the deposits collude and they do an attack, then basically the mechanism penalizes them, and once the attack is detected, it takes away their money, and so they don't have the money to do the second attack anymore. But with hardware, you can't really do that. Like you can't, like there's no way to kind of burn a piece of hardware from inside a protocol. From my kind of point of view of someone who has like really deeply thought about these protocols, I think that proof of stake kind of is better on a bunch of dimensions. And like the kind of meta argument that I use to explain this is basically that because proof of stake has to do with virtual assets that are defined inside the system, it means that you have a lot more freedom in basically determining rules that are optimal. And so we can design systems that like in general have much better incentives, like better structured rewards and like larger penalties for misbehavior and so forth. Whereas with proof of work, you're kind of stuck with the laws of physics in some ways.
Well, there's also this transition plan in place, right? So
Yeah.
we're combining proof of work and proof of stake
Exactly.
for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And you're doing analytics on that,
Right.
to see what's
Exactly.
happening as it evolves.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can pull back if you need to. But that's a pretty technical topic. So for CG viewers who don't really know that much about the details of how, let's talk about a different internal governance aspect, which is how decisions about changes to the protocol are made. Currently, in Bitcoin is done through mining, essentially,
Right.
because the miners decide which version to accept. There are different mechanisms in different chains. We saw, Tezos launch earlier this year, or ICO anyway,
Yeah.
with the idea of building a different kind of a governance system or decision-making system
Yeah.
about protocol changes. There are several other protocols working on different models. And some people say, hey, everybody who uses the system should get to have a democratic say
Right.
in protocol changes. But reality is most people are not developers. They don't
Yeah.
know the details enough to be able to really have an informed opinion about stuff. And
Yeah.
it's just like in our societies where we have rational ignorance about a lot of things, and people don't want to invest their time in trying to figure
Yeah.
out what they want to vote on in this kind of an internal governance scheme. How do you think about this problem? Who should be able to decide?
Governance ultimately is like basically the set of kind of institutions and norms and agreements and kind of standards, like what economists call Schelling points around like basically under what contexts should people use these underlying tools and in what ways. In like the physical world, you would have like parliaments and constitutions and laws and so forth, and you would have also on top of that often very informal norms about like the ways in which different things should be used.
Social norms.
Yeah, exactly. And in the crypto world, I think you basically you have like some of the same thing, right? So you have at the very bottom level, like people's ability to write software, miners' ability to mine on particular chains, and at the higher levels, you would have developers discussing between themselves, developers implementing software, developers you coming up with mechanisms between themselves to agree on like basically what the software changes should make, like what block they should activate at, under what conditions they should be agreed on. And you would have users ultimately always have the ability to basically just rebel and refuse to accept a particular update. And then on top of that, you would also have norms and expectations about what kinds of updates should happen in general. So for example, in Bitcoin, people really cherish the 21 million limit. There's also the ideas of decentralization. There's the idea that this thing is supposed to be a currency, like you're not supposed to arbitrarily take money away from people. So basically, if a user finds something distasteful and there is a norm against it, then the user knows that a lot of other people find it distasteful as well, and they also know that because there exists this kind of, like meta level social object called a norm, there, like other users will also be more interested in coordinating around basically not accepting the update. And so users are going to rebel, not install software, and you have things like Ethereum Classic.
Sure, and there are a lot of really well known and well documented sort of human rationality errors.
Yes, totally.
So I mean, all kinds of biases. If you just go to the wiki page for cognitive biases, you get this list
there's
of
a
like
bunch, yeah.
60 now, and including things like we've changed the way that we remember information because of the Google effect. That we tend not to even bother to remember things that we can easily look up on Google nowadays. And so the way that we interact with technology is actually changing our human thinking biases as well.
Yes.
How do you plan for those and design those in?
This is one of the reasons why the economics of crypto economics is so interesting, because like some people say that, like, oh, crypto economics is not going to work because people are not fully rational or people are not purely motivated by economic factors. But what people don't see, I think, is that even though economic incentives are not the only thing that motivates people, they are a very large thing that motivates people.
Yeah, but there's a difference between motivating people with economic incentives and being able to understand how they will behave in reaction to that incentive.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people could take completely irrational strategies.
Yes, right. But practically speaking, like the idea is that it's easier to predict the idea that people are more likely to take things that will make them more money than it is to predict that any specific bias is going to be very stable and robust across decades and across different cultures and across the actors being people versus organizations versus robots. So that's kind of probably one factor. And another factor that people miss is that it's not just about incentivizing people. It's also about this idea that basically, like, if you try to break Casper, then you lose a lot of money.
Right.
And so even if you're an irrational actor, if you have some particular amount of money, well, you can only do so much. There's a mathematical proof of an upper bound on like the ratio between basically how much harm you can cause and how much money you can burn in order to achieve it.
Right.
And so like using basically like economics as just a way of measuring actors in terms of the resources that they control is also just kind of another aspect of this.
There are a couple of things that have been sort of major topics of conversation around you in the last year, last month or so, couple of months. One of them is about, how much involvement should founders and core devs have in going around and evangelizing blockchain versus actually working on the protocol. Doing things like meeting with world leaders. You caught a lot of flack for your trip to Russia, for example. Why do you do those things? How do you make decisions about how to balance your time?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, first of all, worth it to reach out and talk to people because, first of all, it helps people understand that, this is something that's concrete, that's got actual people behind it, and it's got legs, it's got potential. We're here to help humanity, and I think that just getting the understanding of that and just what the technology is and how it works is valuable. And
have you gotten the sense that people have understood that when you go to talk to world leaders?
I think
that we're here to help humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have been definitely quite friendly in general over the last few years. And it's also important, I think, for us to understand them, right? And basically to understand, what are the challenges that kind of, basically mainstream institutions currently face and what role can the technology have in addressing them. And, some of the conversations I've had, and probably this is more with banks than with governments, but to some extent with everyone around what are the privacy challenges, why are they interested in consortium chains, what is their thinking about scalability. I think that's definitely all fairly important, and some of it definitely does end up informing things that we focus on.
What are the things from your perspective in interfacing with the law, with governments, with regulators that are hindrances to what you're trying to achieve?
I would say the main kind of regulatory thing that's been a hindrance in practice just is difficulty of cryptocurrency exchange. Aside from cryptocurrency, so far there hasn't really been much hindrance to blockchain technology as a whole. But at the same time, public blockchains, despite being usable for a large number of things other than cryptocurrency, still fundamentally relying on cryptocurrency for transaction fees, economic incentivization, and a lot of other things. It would be so much better if people could buy $100 of cryptocurrency instead of $0 of cryptocurrency. And yet, in many places, it's still going from 0 to 100 is much harder than going from 100 to 5,000.
Right.
There's big differences between how politically easy it is to like go after a technology where 90% of it is being used by terrorists
Absolutely.
versus, going after a
90%
technology
by-
where, like going after something that's like the internet where, like yes, terrorists use it, but also the people who catch terrorists use it as well.
And in your sort of looking at different parts of the ecosystem around the world, are there certain areas parts of the world that seem particularly friendly or particularly hostile to Ethereum as an idea or as a project or as a decentralized model of organizing society?
Basically, the thing that I think like a lot of people and probably even a lot of libertarians, even more than average, underappreciate is that very few people hate freedom. Like basically, very few people hate privacy, very few people hate decentralization.
Right.
But there are a lot of people that find all of these things slightly valuable, but not too valuable, and they just come up with 1,000 exceptions for 1,000 different cases why, in this particular case, I want to have more control.
Yeah.
There definitely are places that have more of that than other places. So, on the one hand, China has had the ICO ban and the ban on most crypto trading.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of other places that, like Switzerland, like Singapore, that have shown themselves to be very friendly.
At the end of the day, nobody hates freedom and nobody hates
Yes,
privacy.
exactly.
But a lot of people dislike uncertainty.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
And government is one form of certainty.
Yes.
Sort of the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Definitely.
So one of the implications, though, of being kind of the face of Ethereum, the founder, the core, the center, and everything, is being out there meeting with government leaders and doing these kinds of events and interviews and all this stuff, is the so-called cult of Vitalik.
Yes.
Which I know you're not a fan of personally.
Yeah.
But there's this perception, there's a lot of discussion that Ethereum rises and falls with you,
Right.
that you're sort of the deity within Ethereum. If you say something, it'll happen and it will go, and that as a result, the governance structure of Ethereum kind of boils down to you being involved.
Right.
So how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, it's already gotten to the point whereas it's probably still true that I'm very heavily involved in the longer-term kind of strategic thinking and research agenda. If you look at day-to-day things, so, for example, the specific changes that go into Byzantium, the core dev calls that led to formalizing and standardizing those are publicly available.
Yeah.
And if any neutral third-party observer were to go in and just listen to those calls, I don't think that they would get anything close to the impression that I'm a dictator. They would just get the impression that, I'm a guy who sometimes says stuff, and there's other guys who say stuff, and we just kind of come to final decisions collaboratively. And so, the actual final process that's closer to rollout and implementation basically does look much more like that. And if
you got hit by a bus tomorrow,
if
what's
I
your
got
prediction?
hit by a bus tomorrow, then it's very possible that kind of the long-term strategic agenda around things like sharding, like Casper, Plasma, and so forth would end up going in a substantially different direction in a lot of details. But Byzantium would still be rolled out exactly as it is. I mean, chances are even the current version of Casper would be rolled out exactly as it is. And basically, maintenance in general would just go on. And I do think that very large portions of the ecosystem have already gotten to the point where they are autonomous in that way. And part of that is just happens automatically because, I only have 16 non-sleeping hours in a day and I can only spend them on some things.
Right. What about the question about how you balance your time?
Personally, I have noticed that the amount of time I spend on actual coding has gone down as Ethereum has scaled up, which I think is totally fine because as a coder, there's okay, I can code, but there's also plenty of other people that can code, and plenty of people that can code as well or better than myself. But I see my own talents as being more in architecture and in trying to figure out what are the ways that the system should be constructed, and what are the properties that the system should have. How do we make this marginally more efficient? How do we make this simpler? What kinds of components do we kind of put in together? How do we kind of redesign the thing in order to make it more friendly to scalability and privacy?
Yeah.
If you spend a day coding, then that's a day in which it's harder to spend thinking about those other things. And there are often days where you feel like out of those 16 hours, like 15 and a half of those hours are wasted time, but the other half hour by itself came up with basically one insight, which is already a significant improvement.
Yeah.
That is in some ways how thinking works, right?
Right.
It's sometimes hard to figure out, what is time wasting and what is inspiration. And,
right. We all have that problem.
Totally. And sometimes, it literally as 1/2 hour of one particular week is more valuable than, the other 10,000 minutes put together.
And you can almost never know in
Totally.
advance which
Yep,
half hour
yep,
that's going to
exactly.
be and in
Yeah.
what context you'll find yourself when that inspiration
Yes,
hits.
yeah.
Thanks for the discussion. That was really wide-ranging and interesting. And I'm sure that CG's viewers are going to be excited to learn about this and all the ways that you're contributing to this.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to be here.